Hello to you, wherever you are connecting in the world. My name is Graham Crawshaw, and with Omer Abdullah, we are both delighted to be able to spend the next 59 minutes with you, talking about using procurement analytics to become an agent of change. Some housekeeping points: we are recording this session, and that recording will be made available to you together with the slides that we're going to use today. To make it interactive, we've got 3 polls that we're going to ask you to participate in. It'll be very obvious when those polls are on the screen, and just give us your response to those, and we'll share those and the summary of the information of the polls as well. In terms of questions, comments, answers, many of you have got the hang of the chat mechanism already, but by all means, put any questions. We will do our best to answer as many as we can in the time permitted. So that's the plan. As I said, I'm Graham Crawshaw. I'm the Services Director at CASME, looking after all the procurement content. I've been in procurement throughout my career, so delighted to be here today, and delighted to also welcome Omer.
Thanks so much, Graham. I'm Omer Abdullah. I'm co-founder of the Smart Cube. I lead our procurement operations in North American business as well, but procurement operations globally. Looking forward to the conversation today. All right, so just to dive into the agenda of our conversation, we want to, Graham and my goal in putting this webinar together was really to provide a foundational primer on procurement analytics and really talk through this hot topic. And it's been a growing topic, as many of you know, over the last several years. And I think there's a lot of value that it's brought to procurement, but there's a tremendous amount of value that it's still to bring to procurement. So what we want to do is sort of go through a specific set of questions that we'd like to answer that set the context, define procurement analytics, and talk a little bit about the impact and value and how you can begin to think about implementing it within your organization. So there's 6 broad sets of questions that we're going to talk through today. Number 1, Graham will take us through how has procurement evolved, kind of the context of how we got here today, and why procurement analytics is so important, particularly in the context of all that's gone on, not just in the last several years and procurement evolving in general, but frankly, with regards to COVID and where we are today and where we need to go. So that's the first question: how has procurement evolved? I'll then pick up and talk a little bit about what is procurement analytics. How do we think about that? What are some examples of what procurement analytics is? We'll then go through some specific real-world applications of procurement analytics, and I'll take you through 3 simple case examples, 3 straightforward case examples that talk to kind of progressively the value that procurement analytics can bring at increasingly more sophisticated, complex levels. Graham will then talk us through what are the roadblocks that we need to be aware of. And there's some fundamental, I'd say broadly, there's 4 sets of fundamental aspects that we all need to be aware of. I'll then talk us through what are the main considerations when you are applying procurement analytics. And there's kind of a 3-step, I won't call it, it's not a sequential step, it can be parallel, but there's sort of 3 sets of factors that you really need to consider before you get into it. And then as we close out, Graham and I will both take us through the critical success factors. Think of it as our David Letterman top 10 list of key takeaways that you can leave this event with. And then of course, Q&A, please feel free to ask questions in the chat. And Graham and I will pick up as many of those as we possibly can. And if we can't pick them up in this session, we will certainly follow up afterwards and answer any questions that we were not able to get to. So that's the overall agenda. Graham, I'll hand it over to you to
Excellent.
Good. How it's evolved.
That's nicely defined what people can expect. So I'm going to start by covering up sort of how has procurement evolved. And I mean, across CASME and a Smart Cube, we've seen that organizations are under sort of pressure. Procurement has played a really supportive role, and actually a comment, I've said this a few times now, the pandemic for procurement has actually been quite a good thing. It really has helped. It's boosted credibility within the business. So the top changes that we've seen within the business on the screen, and starting with number one, of course, there's a pressure to put profit and to manage working capital. And we've seen that suppliers have been challenging procurement functions, wanting to have help and support over the last year. And let's face it, there is nothing worse than a supplier that fails because of issues around sort of payment. So we've seen how procurement has been offering either supply chain financing or invoice discounting as a response to that first challenge. And of course, we've seen the increase in sort of market volatility and complexity that's linked with supply chain disruption. And we've seen sort of a good number of examples there. In terms of remote working, well, this debate still continues as to whether it's a good thing, whether organizations should let their people work from home, or whether they need them back in the office. And I think that's going to be a challenge that's going to go on for quite some time. I think what I've seen talking with companies is that office space is going to be much more likely to convert it into a collaborative working space. Right. Recognizing if you're just working on a spreadsheet, you might as well do that at home. There's no point in going to the office for that. Sustainability, a massive challenge. And what we're seeing is companies around the world really stepping up, recognizing that there's something that needs to be done there. And I think procurement's in a really strong position to be able to make a difference, embrace sustainability, and really add some value, especially when it comes to communicating success of projects on that heading. And then finally, skills, the challenge there. And what we're seeing so much is organizations focused on wanting people with really good soft skills, that relationship building that is so important. And as we know, procurement acting as that pivot point between the interface between the supplier and the internal stakeholder. So that's the business environment today and the impact that has connected with procurement. So take a look at this chart, and sort of you can see there the different phases that procurement is going through, almost a bit of a maturity model, if you like. And what I'd like you to do is almost just take a look at what is shown on the graph and where it is shown, because there's no way that a single organization will be in one of the columns. It's going to be a mix. It's a mix of activities that are going on. In some areas, you're more likely to be stronger, but maybe overall, it's going to be a mix of those that perhaps are still under the transactional section rather than the value focused. But it's a progression. And it's that we're seeing and really encouraging procurement to take part of. And as procurement gets stronger and more credible and valued as a strategic partner in the business, then more likely it can move forward into the value add area. We know cost savings are important. We know you're not going to get away without delivering cost savings. But that doesn't mean that the value should end at that point. And there is so much more that procurement can do. So yeah, see where you think that you are on that particular chart. And then finally, in terms of this first section, let's look at where we've been and where we're going to as a procurement function. So I've mentioned the pandemic's been good for procurement. We're riding on the success where procurement has been able to deliver value and really build its credibility. And one of the points that we see on the screen here in terms of the plan for 2021, it's been validated by benchmarking that we've done at CASME, really looking at this value beyond savings. And whether it is looking at supply relationship management, aligning to business objectives, having a knowledge and using market intelligence, compliance, diversity, sustainability. So the list goes on. And procurement's got a role to play. Back to sustainability, it's firmly on the agenda wherever you are in the world. One of the things that we do is track procurement maturity in different parts of the world and actually seeing how successful it has been. Procurement's got a key role to play, and it was only last October, Omer and I were chatting with the co-founders of the Sustainable Procurement Pledge, an organization that's really getting procurement individuals to make their commitment to environmental matters. So the list can be a little bit overfacing, but you've got to almost start and get on with it and make some value for procurement. So with that introduction, what we'd like to do is our first poll. And if I just make the poll live, you should see that now on your screen. What we'd like you to do is enter 3 impacts on the business environment. So don't cheat the system. You could technically enter more than 3, but we want the top 3. So give some thought. So what are your top 3 impacts? And they are, this just briefly listing them whilst you respond. The budget pressure to recover profitability and preserve cash. Increased market volatility and complexity. Higher risks of supply chain disruption. Changing the ways of working. Drive for sustainability, or the skills evolution. So think through those, and for your organization, what would you say the top 3 are? Just giving you a few more seconds as the system takes a little bit of time to process. That's 56% of you have now voted. Delighted to have over 200 people on the panel on the webinar today. So in fact, 219 people to be precise. And 71% of you have now voted. Going to give you a few more seconds and then going to close out that poll. 80% have voted. Thank you. I know the technology can prevent some people from voting, but I'm going to, in the interest of time, end it there and then share the polling results. Omer, pressure to recover profitability and preserve cash. I don't think I'd necessarily be surprised, because if you look at the results, they're all quite close to each other. Yeah. So whether it's volatility, the supply chain disruption, or changing ways of working, but I guess it gives a bit of a priority there.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and in a way, not a surprise, right? Given kind of all that we've had to live through over the last year, and certainly what we're grappling with coming out. I use this word carefully, coming out of the pandemic. We're in different places in different parts of the world. I fully appreciate that. But certainly as we're sort of moving into the end of year 1 and into year 2 of the pandemic, budget pressure to recover profitability, preserve cash being the #1 thing is no surprise for many organizations. There's only a few industries that have really, I'll use the word flourished during the pandemic. Food, for example, being one of them. But interesting takeaway there. That's great.
Excellent. Let's move forward.
All right. So I'll pick up the next section. We will be talking about, with that context of where procurement is, and you'll note that on the last slide that Graham presented, he talked a little bit about the need to drive insight-led procurement. And in order to be insight-led, procurement analytics plays a fundamental role. Right? Now, the interesting thing is, as we think about procurement analytics, there seems to be different views of what procurement analytics is. We have kind of a broad idea of what analytics is in the broader world when you look at strategy and marketing realms and supply chain and other aspects. But in procurement, we tend to have a lot of folks tend to have a particular perspective in terms of what procurement analytics is. So let's talk a little bit about what our perspective is when we think about procurement analytics and what it includes. So fundamentally, pretty base level definition, procurement analytics is the process of turning data into actionable insights to address procurement priorities. I think that's foundational. I think we can all agree with that. The interesting thing is that there's sort of 4 levels of questions that we can answer through procurement analytics. the first set of questions that we want to answer is, what do we have? Where does it exist? That's the base level starting point, which is the data management phase of procurement analytics, right? That's just understanding the kind of information that we have today. It's interesting, and that's, what is that? That's creating a data repository or a master data set, standardizing the data. It's doing the checks and the validation and getting that core spend cube, if you will, together. It's interesting because I was talking to Graham about this before, but if you go back to when I started doing strategic sourcing, which I'll date myself, back in the 1990s, the big problem then was getting your spend under control and being able to identify it. I think we made leaps and material strides forward in leaps and bounds to be able to address that issue, but it's still a fundamental problem. And a lot of that is driven by inorganic growth, M&A activity, et cetera, multiple systems, homegrown systems, et cetera. But the first phase of procurement analytics is understanding what you have, the data management phase. The next phase from this perspective is then understanding, what is it telling us? What actually happened, right? And that's the descriptive analytics phase, right? Understanding real-time reporting, putting together metrics and KPI dashboards, measuring performance in different ways, and really using that data, organizing it, and then using that data to tell us what exactly happened. As we understand what exactly happened, we can then answer the third set of questions, which is fundamentally, why did it happen? That's more diagnostic in nature. And this is interesting because here we can apply external, internal benchmarks. We can look at levers within the category to reduce costs by looking at the data itself and how it's spread across geographies or other frames of reference, if you will. We can look at risk analytics. We can do root cause analysis and really understand not just what happened and what's the data telling us, but why is it happening that way? And then the fourth and most progressive level is being able to use that data to define what happens next. And that is the realm of predictive and prescriptive analytics, which is forecasting and assessing different scenarios for action planning, building simulation models for optimization, and more. And we'll talk about a few examples in some of these areas about that. One more point that I'd like to make on this is when you think about procurement data, that a lot of times we tend to think of procurement analytics as being simply taking spend data and working with it. But it's much, much more than that, right? And of course, yes, we can talk about spend data can include many different things, but fundamentally it also includes product service cost data, it includes raw material price data, it includes supplier data, contract data, and much, much more. In other words, it's both internal data and external data. So one of the things that we'd like you to walk away with from this conversation today that we have is that when we think about procurement analytics, it is a holistic activity that involves internal and external data. It involves multiple different elements, right? So, if I simply have a pen, this is going to be my answer to doing everything. But you have to be able to look at solving a problem by using data from multiple sources, bringing it together, applying that analysis, the analytics to it, and then developing an insight that allows you to make a better decision accordingly. So that's the 4 levels questions to define procurement analytics. The next page gives you a few examples. Now, I think we're going to share these slides. So, there's no, I won't go through this in a great level of detail, but essentially, as we said, it's more than spend analysis, and it can drive value across the category management lifecycle, or the 7-step process, or however you want to think about your day-to-day sourcing activities, whether you're developing category strategy, whether you're implementing it, or whether you're doing ongoing category management. And that's everything from the things that we normally think about: base spend visibility, specification rationalization, volume aggregation, right? Savings opportunity assessment, pretty fundamental. We're pretty comfortable with those things. But it also encompasses the realm of should cost model, right? TCO analysis, using analytics to drive RFX and bid analytics, right? So the more complex the RFP, the more data, the more you can use tools, even fundamental tools like Tableau, to drive better visualization and scenario analysis of what's there. Of course, price harmonization, tail spend optimization is a classic area to be able to apply value. And then on the right-hand side, it's everything from risk analytics, doing predictive cost modeling work, right the way through to PPV, purchase price variance analytics, including if you're working with third-party contract manufacturers, payment terms optimization, et cetera. So there's a wealth of applications from a procurement analytics perspective. So one of the things that we'd like you to take away from this conversation is, A, it's more than spend. B, there's a lot that goes into it. And as we talk about some examples of procurement analytics, we'll talk you through some of the ways that you can think about, maybe broaden the horizons of, it's not just taking data and working on it in a vacuum, but incorporating external data, external benchmarking, external insights into that analysis, so you get true insights coming out of it that allow you to make better decisions accordingly. So before we get into those examples, though, I believe, Graham, you have another poll question for us.
We certainly have. So let's launch this this second poll. So really keen to understand with everyone on the webinar today, to what extent is procurement analytics established in your department? And just pick the one that's most appropriate, either limited to spend analytics at the data management level, at the descriptive analytics level, at the diagnostic analytics level, or at the predictive and prescriptive analytics level. Gosh, there's a mouthful there, Omer. It made sense when we came up with the poll, but trying to say it is a
whole different ballgame.
Quite a mouthful. Yeah, good job I didn't have that stronger drink that we were talking about earlier. So just give a few more seconds. 50% of you have voted. Yeah, to what extent is procurement analytics established in your function, in your department? Could you please explain the options a little more? Omer, is there anyone that you wish to give a bit more detail on?
Just at a quick high level, are you using it essentially, when you think about procurement analytics, is it really focused around spend analysis only? Or at the data management level means, are you still trying to get your data together, right? What do I have? Or have you got your data together and the bulk of the work is around descriptive? What is it telling me? What's the data actually saying? Are you then taking the next step to apply towards diagnostic work? So doing root cause analysis and using that data to tell you why things are happening the way that they're happening versus simply reporting out the data. And then at the predictive and prescriptive level, that's really telling us, where do I go from here? Are you using it then to do, let's say, forecasting? Are you doing it to do planning in a more sort of futuristic predictive sense, if you will? So that's the snapshot version of kind of what each of those elements are.
And they're increasing in complexity, maturity as you go down the list. So thank you. Almost 80% of you have voted again. In the interest of time, I'm going to cut the polling there. Share the results. Interesting, having just said that they're going up in complexity, 30% have responded that it's limited to spend analytics. That may be why people are on the webinar today, to find out a little bit more. But equally, I think representative of the challenges that procurement faces. Are you surprised about that, Omer?
No, I think it broadly makes sense. And I think, while analytics has been growing as a topic for a while, I think in procurement in particular, I think we've been grappling with different applications. And there's a host of reasons for that, which I think are which makes sense. There are, and Graham's going to get into this as we go forward and talk about this in terms of some of the roadblocks. There are some material issues. I mean, part of it is to do with having the, well, I think the most foundational is to do with the skill sets, not to steal Graham's thunder, as we're going to go into that. But there's a skill set issue, there's tools issues, there's a whole host of things. But I also think there's an awareness issue. And so, which is why I'm so happy that we have, at this point, almost 240 people listening to this conversation, because I think this is the challenge we have ahead of us, is that we can really take this and take it to another level, but it requires us to think through various parameters. So great insights, not 100% surprising, good to see some folks pushing the envelope in the different areas, but look, these are early days. I think that what it tells us is there's opportunity to be had. Let's go after that opportunity.
Excellent.
Okay. All right. So let me pick up that next section then. Let's talk a little bit about some real world applications of procurement analytics. And what we've done here is I'm going to go through these fairly fast, but we're going to, again, share these slides. But there's 3 examples that we've put together to talk through how you can think about applying procurement analytics. And again, we're using this in a holistic sense. There's going to be a lot in here that we might not normally think of, well, is that analytics, is that not? But I think it all goes together to make a better decision. And at the end of the day, we're all about making better decisions. So example 1 is a more traditional example, one that I think we'll all be familiar with, which is spend consolidation in indirect spend. So in this situation, there was a, sorry, I've got a pop-up coming up with me. In this situation, the organization was a global gas distribution company. They experiencing high costs across their indirect categories. They wanted to identify ways to save costs and improve the bottom line ultimately. So what did they do? Fundamental steps. I think this will resonate with a lot of you. Conducted industry benchmarking. They did analysis of their own data, Pareto analysis, for example, to look for quick wins, right? How do I rationalize my supplier base? How do I consolidate the number of contracts I've got, even if I don't rationalize my supplier base for the biggest spend categories? They looked at internal price benchmarking to look for opportunities for cost savings, especially across geographies. And they looked at purchase price variance analytics to then look for harmonization, optimization opportunities from a cost perspective. Ultimate impact was about $350 million across 3 global categories. Makes sense? I think a lot of folks will probably be, yeah, that makes sense, nodding my head. A lot of the kind of stuff that we do. Interesting point to point out there is that's not just internal data. When I talk about industry benchmarking, we're also looking at external information being fed in so we can compare our data to something that is taking place elsewhere in a similar category. That's not to say, and when I worked in management consulting, we'd have these debates all the time. What is first quartile? Do I need to be first quartile? And the answer is maybe. Right? But the point is, it gives you an indicator. It tells you why those folks are operating at that level. And then you have to make a decision to say, am I able to get there and drive value? So that's the first example around spend consolidation, which again, as I said, pretty traditional example. Let's go to another example. This one is around category analytics and particularly for MRO. And in this situation, there's a steel manufacturer, hot industry, at this point in time, had a lot of dependency on limited vendors for belts and accessories, limited visibility of the total cost of ownership on belts, and no cash benefit from falling raw material prices. Maybe in different contexts, a lot of us that resonates with a lot of us, right? So what they ended up doing, this is the next level of complexity that we sort of think about, right? Is they, in order to solve this, procurement analytics is at the core of what we're trying to do, but it was a collaborative activity. You cannot make some of these decisions on your own. So procurement pulled together manufacturing, engineering, finance to evaluate the complete process. Some of the things that they actually did, spend analysis to find hidden costs and maintenance activity, for example, in maintenance activity, should cost modeling, looking at raw material price movements, looking at innovations and specifications and material, because again, that all plays in to what's going on. It's doing an external assessment to look at global sourcing opportunities. What are best sourcing practices? And this is putting aside the whole nearshore, reshore issue that we're broadly talking about in the national agenda these days in many countries, but broadly that's kind of how they looked at it. And then of course, once they ran the RFP, it's running the actual analytics to look for sourcing opportunities and negotiation levers and KPIs. So a couple of points I want to point out there before we get to the impact. I mean, there's a material impact, right? So material price improvements for both belts, for rollers, reduce their spend by about 10% over the following 12 months. But the interesting thing there is, again, they're looking at analytics more broadly. They're taking internal data, spend, their own costing information compared to looking at external information around raw material price movements and how does that factor in to how I'm spending, how I'm working with suppliers, what's the implications for my organization. And then it's applying the power of analytics to complex data sets to the RFP process and looking for what is the best impact, what are the best outcomes, what are the alternative scenarios for optimization, if you will. So a lot of value that can be brought out. And again, a little bit more involved than the spend analysis example, but equally valuable from an impact perspective. Last but not least, the third example that I'll walk us through is around inflation modeling and price forecasting. And this can be applied to direct and indirect commodities, right? So we tend to think of forecasting as the domain of the direct, but frankly, there's a lot of application on the indirect side as well. So in this situation, CPG company, consumer goods, had a lot of spending, overdrawn budgets, a lot of price alerts, less than optimum outcomes from supplier negotiations. They need to be able to effectively plan their budgets and improve their bargaining power. So what did they do? So in this situation, a number of different steps in order to build this inflation model, if you will, right? They extracted their spend data, they applied Python-based algorithms to classify that data and then determine the weights for within that those spend categories for more than 250 direct and indirect constituent commodities, right? Metals, energies, fuels, resins, chemicals, etc. So you understand what's that data? What are the categories? You understand the constituent commodities that are at play directly for the direct and indirect side. You then use internal SMEs to then identify what are the key factors and variables that impact the price movement of those key commodities, and then determine the statistical relationships between the different variables. If price moves in this direction, if commodity price movements move in this direction, how does that play out in terms of the controllable factors, i.e. specific commodities versus, let's say, lesser controllable issues around SG&A and those sorts of aspects. You then collate all of this information, cost, spend, commodity forecast, contract data, to build out inflation models at the category levels, the regional, global levels, and you analyze procurement spend. They analyze procurement spend across 50 to 60 countries. Global organization, plenty of spend at play. And on the basis of that, you can then, if I oversimplify, use that model, identify where the constituent input prices and commodity prices are going. How does that ultimately play out? It's not a one-for-one translation. If this goes up by 1%, your price goes up by 1%. But if this goes up by 1%, it might be 0.6 for a category, it might be 0.4, it might be 0 in specific instances, etc. And so you're then able to use, in this situation, a Power BI-based portal to then deliver that commodity intelligence and allow the end stakeholder to be able to use and play with that information and understand it better. And the impact here neutralized an estimated $8 million of impact of market movement through better negotiations. Yes, cost avoidance, that is a real thing. I do believe that. I know a lot of people don't believe that. But I do think in many environments, it's actually quite real. And then $20 million savings from dedicated commodity forecasting. So those are 3 examples of applying procurement analytics. And again, you'll notice it's not just about taking data and working with that data on your own. It's about understanding that data, taking it to different levels. It's looking at external information, applying it in, and doing a little bit of sophisticated thinking and modeling, if you will, to then draw out the real meat and insight of that data in terms of what it specifically means. So those are 3 examples.
And Omer, we've had a number of comments about sort of what do the percentages look like, and I know it's difficult when you're trying to present a case study without giving away confidential information. I think it's fair to say that by definition of doing these case studies, these have been projects that the company has been very pleased and they've been successful. So whilst we may not be able to give the percentage of saving or that level of detail, clearly these are the success stories that we're sharing with everyone today.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And look, here's the way I would look at it, right? In terms of, and I think there was a question around the initial example around spend analysis and spend consolidation. You know, the number was big, $350 million, but the company was huge, right? So for them, it's a material, actually, it doesn't matter if the percentage is high or low. At the end of the day, whatever movement you can get, the beauty of that is all of that movement flows to the bottom line, right? All of it flows to the bottom line. And so there's real implications whether you get a 2% reduction, whether you get a 10% reduction. And in some industries, consumer goods in particular, a 1 to 2% savings benefit is material because a lot of these companies are very mature in terms of where they are and where they're operating at. So yes, 100% varies by industry, percentage matters. The dollar volume ultimately translates to different numbers for different companies. But I think it gives you a flavor that no matter what it is, there's impact. There's real value to be able to be realized by taking your data and better analyzing it in conjunction with external information, et cetera, that's out there. So those are the examples, just conscious of time as we move through this. Graham, I'll hand it over to you to talk about roadblocks that we need to be aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Omer. And I always like when we can use real life examples, because again, it's not handing it on a plate to people. It's to get people to think sort of, yeah, how can this actually impact and how can this work within my own organization? And of course, it's not easy. There are challenges and some roadblocks. And so we've identified some of these. First of all, looking in terms of data. And the challenges here, the lack of availability, or the challenge of getting the right clean data coming necessarily from, may not be coming from one system, maybe coming from multiple systems, poor quality in terms of just supplier names. I often hear the same examples of those companies that if they're spelt incorrectly, the supplier name's not correct, it can have a knock-on effect as you try and sort of clean that data up. So certainly data number one. In terms of technology itself, there can be a lot of frustration with the ERP systems that organizations are using. My goodness, sometimes I hear some really negative points with companies frustrated with the systems they're using. I'm not going to mention any names, but you know which are those large systems that can cause so much frustration. I know when we've done benchmarking, you find the results that many organizations are using spreadsheets, whether it's to manage their activity on sustainability or the latest one being risk. Again, frustration of risk-based solutions. So there are new systems coming out, and they will take time to settle in and develop, but it certainly is a roadblock. We've then got the process and the challenge of getting that sort of funding, that credibility that procurement justifies or needs to justify to get the systems, to get the support it needs. I would say, because of the success of the pandemic, of procurement really stepping up, now is a very good time to put a business case together to justify funding for investment for new systems or doing things differently. I've seen a number of examples of that. And then finally, the issues around talent, the need for having a team that has got the right skills, the right ability to either analyze or interpret or just use some of the systems. Omer, you mentioned Power BI. I mean, just understanding and being able to take that data and tell a story all around it. So yeah, there are some challenges, which leads us nicely on to the final poll that we've got in today's session, because we'd like to hear from you. What are, and we were doing so well. Why have I got an error message? Error 4401. What on earth is that? Thank you, Zoom. That doesn't help.
I'm getting a relaunch.
Hey, there we go. Look, we've got it now. The error is gone. So what are the main roadblocks to procurement analytics in your organization? And again, select the top 3. So please read all the 6 and then say, what are the top 3 that are most appropriate to your organization? And it matches the 6 items that I've just been sort of talking about, whether it is senior level commitment, the lack of funding, the lack of a clear business case, data quality issues, multiple technology systems, or the availability of analytics talent. So your top 3, and we'll just give you a few more seconds to respond. Hopefully you can see that. The last roadblock on the list was talent. So we had the 4 high-level roadblocks, and now we're just getting this poll specifically on these that we've identified, the top 6 areas here that we'd like your input on.
And that error in getting the poll out just goes to show that we're actually live.
Oh, we are, yes.
We are not a recording, not yet.
We don't do recordings, do we? We like the pressure of doing it,
exactly.
doing it live, absolutely. Giving people a few more seconds, 70% voted. We'll just give you a few more seconds to make that nearer 80 if that's going to work, and then we'll move on. I'm going to stop it there. We're not quite at 80, but let me share the results. And wow, Omer, data quality issues. So all that we've been talking about clearly resonates with the 200 plus audience that we've got today. So yeah, data quality issues number 1, followed by multiple technology systems. Yeah. I hinted on that, the multiple instances of an ERP system in different regions around the world makes life very complex. And then thirdly, the analytics talent. So maybe we should be encouraging sort of university students to really focus on getting a role. I mean, clearly that's where the jobs are. That's what you've got to be going after. So some interesting observations there. Anything more to add?
No, I think that's, so 2 things. One is 100% agree. I think, data quality issues make sense. Multiple technology, particularly, a lot of the attendees are probably from large organizations that have grown over the years, homegrown systems, M&A activity, cobbling together multiple systems, that makes sense. Availability of talent is a perennial problem. Everybody's grappling with that. So that's no surprise. I'm heartened to see, though, that those are the three top ones, and that the three at the bottom are senior level commitment, lack of funding, and clear business case. What that tells us, and I appreciate for those of you who voted that those are your prime issues, that is your big problem, and that is certainly something to work through. But from a universe perspective, glad to see that now we're grappling with sort of the nuts and bolts of, okay, let's get this figured out and do it, versus why should we do it. But for those that we're grappling with in terms of why we should do it, I think the next couple of sections should hopefully help in terms of putting together a better case, in terms of being able to think through some of the issues and obstacles and roadblocks that are there as well. So, so with that, shall we dive into the next piece? Okay. All right, so the next section we're going to talk about are what are the main considerations when applying procurement analytics. And I'm very conscious, we have about 18 minutes left, and I do want to leave a little bit of time for Q&A. So I'm going to breeze through these relatively quickly. Again, you will get the slides, but the way to sort of think about it is there are three broad factors, and I don't want you to think of this in a sequential basis. Some of this has to be done in a parallel basis. But the first thing that we have to understand is assessing our technical readiness, right? And there's four broad elements to consider there. Number one is, do we have the right access to data? Do we have sufficient data available? Is it clean? Is it relevant? Is it structured? Is it organized? Is it easily accessible? Right? Can I get to that data in a relatively straightforward fashion? The second aspect is tech maturity. What's the current level of technology adoption? Is your team savvy and quick enough to adopt new technology? It's a bit of a cultural nuance, which we're going to come back to in a second, but can we understand that? The third aspect is, do we have access to the right analytical skills? Do you have the access to the right talent, the skills needed to operationalize your analytics strategy? Do you have access to cross-functional team of people with distinct skills, knowledge of data science and AI, category, business expertise, tech, tool expertise, et cetera? When you think about analytics, just a very quick point is, there's sort of multiple aspects. There's a data engineering element of it. There is almost like, think of it like a visualization and reporting element to it. And then there's that whole AI, ML aspect. I'm oversimplifying a little bit, but there are different types of skill sets. So that competition for talent is not just about getting an analytics person, it's about getting the right kind of person to be able to do that, and bringing in the relevant tools, technologies, and category knowledge, business knowledge as well. And last but not least is geographical integration, right? So does your procurement function follow a centralized model at a global level, or is it more distributed? That makes having a centralized approach a little more challenging. And then are there geographic restrictions based on political, economic situations that impact how you would deploy procurement analytics? Data issues, privacy issues, all of those aspects play in as well. So that's the first piece. The second piece is around assessing business readiness. And there's four pieces to consider here. The first one is going to be profitability and financial state. Is the organization financially sound, equipped to invest in procurement technologies, analytics, and tools? I want to be clear. This does not mean a massive investment in an end-to-end system. We're going to talk a little bit about that when we get to the critical success factors, but it does require some investment in tools, and it requires investment in people. That's the most important thing. That's number one. The second bucket is senior level support. Is that adoption of analytics being endorsed and prioritized by your senior stakeholders? If it is not, I will say that is a red flag. That's a fundamental problem. If it's not being accepted at the senior level, that's a fundamental problem, because these issues have to be factored into the KPIs. They have to be part of C-suite discussions. You have to have visibility to dashboards, et cetera. Fundamental requirement, right? The third piece is around having the right policies and processes. Do you have the right policies in place to support the adoption of an analytics strategy? Is there a defined framework of roles and responsibilities? Again, we go back to the talent issue. Is there an opportunity to redefine the operating model and processes to accommodate a progressive digital agenda? Gartner put out a really interesting paper on this becoming a sensing organization. And I think that's really, that's kind of a hot topic these days that people are talking about. That is actually pretty cool. It's about embedding analytics into your organization so that you're monitoring and getting a sense of what's going on in the organization, and you can respond to it immediately. Last point I'll talk about here is company culture. Critical aspect, not always well considered, but does your company culture encourage learning new skills, embracing new tech, adapting to change, while letting go of legacy traditions? And that's fundamental in this world of analytics, because you have to rethink how you work with data, who you work with, because there is an element of ecosystem that comes into this. It's not all DIY, but you have to think about it in kind of a broader context. So we talked about tech readiness. We talked about business readiness. The third aspect that we're going to get into is around then identifying priority areas. We often start here, and you can certainly start here to get an idea, but you have to do the other aspects as well. And very quickly, what are the pain points, challenges in my procurement function? The next piece is around which procurement objectives or business problems will analytics address for us as an organization. That will vary depending on where you are, what stage of development, as Graham took us through. But all of those factors you have to consider. The third piece is around which parts of the procurement function would benefit the most from procurement analytics. And then last but not least is what are the risks associated with deploying procurement analytics. So that's a quick run through. I realize I went through it pretty fast, just given timelines, so we can get to Q&A. But again, what I want to point out is it is not about being sequential in that process, right? You can certainly do that in a sequential manner, but understand the tech, understand the business readiness, including cultural factors, and then look at, from a procurement perspective, what is it that we can do within our organization? What do we need to do to drive the most value? Okay, so with that, we come to the last question we're going to talk about in this conversation today, and this is your takeaway, if you will. I'm a huge fan of David Letterman, love top 10 lists, and no presentation or webinar should be complete without a top 10 list. And here's the one that Graham and I have put together. It's a 10-point checklist to ensure success in your analytics journey. I think this should resonate given everything that we've talked about. And Graham, please jump in as I go through this. Number one, assess technical readiness, right? Do I have the data? Do I have the right systems? Do I have the tools, etc.? Assess your business readiness. Do I have the people? Do I have the culture? Do I have the senior commitment to be able to embed this and drive this more progressively in my organization? Number three, identify your pain points and business objectives, challenges, and risks. If you don't know where you're going to drive value, you don't know how to tackle this. And again, I'm going to touch back on this point. There could be a wealth of areas to look at, but if you don't understand this aspect of analytics and the fact that it's broader than spend analytics and that you can apply it in a more creative way using external information and data to be able to drive that, that's going to be a limiting factor. Of course, you have to set up number four, set up a well-defined data governance and security management process to ensure that the data is accurate and secure. That's fundamental, particularly when you're dealing with supplier data as well as your own data that comes into it. Number five, ensure GDPR compliance. Big issue, obviously, of the last several years in Europe, and certainly now with, in the US, and this has been in place both with the Biden administration and the prior administration, questions of data privacy, questions of how can different organizations utilize data. That's so it's a big topic and a big issue to consider here as well. Number six, I
think that's one that as yet we don't necessarily have the full picture. As I mean, Europe has led with the whole sort of GDPR. Yeah, it's taking companies time to even just get that settled in. I think the understanding of procurement's involvement, especially then when it comes to either patient data, customer data, there are so many impacts there. And as new legislation comes in different parts of the world, that's going to be a complex one that that we'll just need to keep a very close eye on. But I say that's, I think there's more to come on that one.
100%, 100%. Number six on our list is define SLAs with respect to timelines and quality, et cetera. What are you trying to get out of it? Number seven, this is important. Start small and do it effectively. In other words, deploy your analytics strategy in phases, evaluating success at regular intervals. Don't try and do a full sweep, big bang approach to things. You know, I think what we've generally found is that rarely works. It's better to do a small piece, bite it off, show value, communicate that value. And I think that's something that we as procurement need to do much, much more is we don't tend to communicate. We don't tend to market ourselves. It's not a dirty word. Let's get the word out. Let's tell folks what it is that we've done and how we've done it, because what that'll do, word of mouth, it'll spread the procurement message, if you will, and it allows you then to invest. It shows an ROI that allows you to take it to another level.
Omer, I think on that one, you're right. Typically, procurement almost is embarrassed because don't want to talk about cost savings in front of stakeholders. But we were saying about the sustainability agenda, there's no reason why procurement can't sort of shout out loud about the small incremental projects. Really develop case studies, develop those storytelling techniques so that you can make a big noise about what you've achieved and get used to it. And that's how procurement builds its overall credibility. And then you don't need to worry about talking about the cost savings.
100%. And you know, that leads nicely to the next point, which is focus on value creation and not just cost savings. Think broadly. That allows you to send a broader message to many more stakeholders, including some, which we all know we have, who have that baggage of what procurement used to be, right? But when you talk about value creation and broader insights and understanding the dynamic, that's where it is. And by the way, I'll tell you, every time I have a conversation with a client, with an organization from a SmartQ point of view, the fundamental message I say is, you know, when they say, oh, you know, what are we trying to do? To me, the ultimate goal of procurement needs to become the #1 value creator in the organization. And you know what happens? I have a subset of people who say, that's not going to happen in procurement. And then I have a subset of people who say, wow, that's awesome. That's what I want to go do. So I think this is one of the tools that allow you to take that step to really push to become the #1 value creator and really focus on delivering overall value to the organization. Okay, so that's number 8. Number 9, engage with an expert to help you manage the entire process at a holistic level, give you insight into best practices. And this is broad, right? This is the point of this is we all, no matter what organization we're in, we have a sort of a tendency to DIY, right? My wife complains about me all the time, right? Why do you have to do this yourself? Why can you not just get an expert to do this? At the end of the day, analytics is a fast evolving, it's a dynamic area. There's multiple facets to consider in terms of what needs to get done. Don't feel you have to do it all yourself, right? So engage folks, talk to your peers. That's why the CASME forums are so valuable, because you can talk to your peers and understand what are other people doing. Engage experts. Understand that this is an ecosystem-based approach that you should take and really build in the right capabilities and skill sets to drive value. And then number 10, last but not least, seek regular feedback from end users. And this goes back a little bit to number 7 as well, which is understand what they're telling you. Understand the value you're getting. It's kind of like that old adage about, you know, when I was in IT, I would churn out 1,000 reports and I don't know who would use it. And so the way to do it was you turn them all off and you see who complains, right? Well, let's not get there. Let's get feedback from the outset. Let's start to understand what's working, what's not working. Let's be open enough and humble enough to be able to tweak and turn directions to be able to get to where we want to go. Because there's so much value. There's a wealth of value in this realm of analytics and procurement analytics and ultimately procurement value creation that it can really drive things, drive the organization and its impact to another level. So that's the top 10 lists. Graham, anything else that you would add?
I think we've covered it as we went along. I'm not going to talk about my DIY skills. I'm a great believer in stick to what you could do that well and get others that do what they do well to help you. So that does resonate with me as well.
Right. So I think that brings us to the end, I believe, in Q&A.
It certainly does. Right. So we've got 4 minutes to ask any questions.
We've had some great questions from the audience, so thank you, everyone. I've one really good question here. Is it too early to talk AI and analytics in procurement?
So the simple answer is, I would say no. I think there are aspects where you can begin to apply AI and related tools in different areas, spend analysis being one of them. There's a whole best of breed ecosystem out there. There's companies that are beginning to apply it in different aspects, including in things like commodity forecasting. Do I think it's at the level that maybe we might consider from a retail or a marketing analytics perspective, or some of the progressive work that's being done there? I don't think quite so, but I think there's companies pushing the envelope. I think there's some interesting developments and things that are going on. Graham, would you agree?
I would. I still think there's the perception that every other company is much more advanced than your own on this. So I think as the message has been consistent over this last hour, almost start small, actually just get something done, and that builds the reputation. So it's there. It still is early days, but that makes it exciting. That means that we're at the start of this journey, and there's lots of learning to be had, new systems to be sort of tested out. I'm certainly seeing more organizations sort of like chatbots and some of those sort of technologies that really can make a difference early on. But yes, the perception can often be with AI that it's all singing, all dancing, fantastic system, with some way to go on that one yet.
Do you see a difference between product-based and project-based industries in terms of how useful analytics can be? We ran a spend analysis, but because it was based on projects, it wasn't so relevant for predicting future spend.
It's a good question. You know, I would say, without understanding more about the context and the data set that you'd be looking at, I would say that it's probably a question of, so the way I would explain it, and hopefully I'm going to explain it well, is when I think of a product, right, you can break down that spend and the related information into multiple subcomponents, and then analyze that from an optimization perspective, right? Whether it's consolidation, rationalization, whatever it might be. From a project perspective, to me, if I've understood it right, and I'm happy to take this offline and discuss this further with whoever asked this, but for me, a project I would see as an aggregated consolidation of multiple different either products or services, et cetera, that go into completing the project. If I'm looking, I don't know what the industry is, but if you sort of think of it in that way, it's simply a question of aggregation. Simply, I use that word carefully. It's a question of aggregation and looking at the different constituents within that project and what makes it up. And then looking at elements that can help us drive product predictability. Maybe there's commonality across types of projects. Maybe there's commonality across different types of projects within specific geographies, et cetera. But so it's really about understanding data at different levels and being able to get at it. It's probably happy to take that offline to whoever asked that question to understand more from an industry perspective and provide a more granular answer. But Graham, does that?
I think you're right, Omer, because I think ultimately it can all be broken down often to time and materials. The time is then an hourly rate. So there's lots of number crunching that can be done on that. So I think it's just looking at that opportunity. As you say, hard to tell on the specifics.
Just before you wrap up, very quickly, because I know we want to wrap up right now, but somebody made a comment saying, accept that data is always dirty. I love that comment. What it means is stop searching for perfection. Understand that you're never going to get to 100%. Work with what you've got and make it happen. So thank you so much, whoever made that comment. Sorry, Graham, back to you.
No, I'm sure we've got plenty of other questions, but we promised to finish dead on time today. So thank you for participating in the polls. We hope you found the conversation. I mean, Omer and I, we just like to have a chat. The fact anyone's listening, that's then just a bonus. Omer, you've got a book coming out. There's going to be a publicity opportunity here. What's your book about, and when's it out, and how do we get it?
The book is called Risk in Your Supply Chain, and I co-authored it with my colleague Subhash Chandar. And it's really talking about how to look at and think about risk as you're dealing with a global crisis. So timely, given what we've just gone through. And really what we do in the book is we talk through kind of the history and the context of risk from a procurement perspective. We talk about a framework to think about risk at multiple levels. And we present our framework, which is what we call the Act and Adapt framework, to both be proactive and responsive when you think about risk. So comes out on 26th of May. I sound like an infomercial. I'm Tony Robbins or something.
You do, yeah. Well, I look forward to talking about the book with you at a future webinar. So I think we're out of time for now. Thank you all for participating in this webinar. We will share the recording and the slides until Omer and I meet again and have another chat. Thank you all, and goodbye for now.
Thanks so much. Take care.